beer, it's good for you.
Hello and welcome to part 8 of my series of videos that look at common mistakes made by homebrewers. The purpose of this series is to put people on the right track within a key number of areas within each video. If you find that you are already on the right track, then I hope you will find this reassuring. I will not go into huge detail on each topic, but where appropriate I will link forward to further information within the video and mirror these links within the video's YouTube description. So let's get started. Many years ago, dry yeast was far less developed in terms of viability compared to fresh liquid yeast. There was also the issue that liquid yeast covered a far wider spectrum of yeast types compared to dry. For quite some years now, dry yeast has come along in leaps and bounds in terms of viability and selection, and yet for some homebrewers this information is somewhat missed, and the stigma against dry yeast remains unduly. In many cases now, the exact same yeast can be obtained in both dry and liquid forms, and where there is no exact substitution, selection can still be made from a variety of choice, leading to a very pleasing result. On screen now I am showing my first example, which as you can see covers American ale yeast. Next to this title we have the Y yeast example to the right here and the White Labs version underneath. Further to the right I have made suggestions of alternatives from 3 different dry yeast companies. Now it should be fully understood that not all of these 5 yeast types are actually identical, but they are in the same family and as such are suitable for an American style ale. The end result that you obtain from any of these 5 yeast types is going to be very satisfactory as long as you do your part right as the brewer and look after your yeast well during the fermentation. I think it is fair to say that some of the older brewers have only ever used liquid yeast and are continuing with it and making starters for each batch because they are caught within a routine of habit. Not only is this much more time consuming, but it is also much more expensive compared to dry yeast. There is also the limited shelf life differences to bear in mind also, where dry yeast has a huge benefit. Now please do not misunderstand me here. If you're aware of all of this and still choose liquid yeast, then great. My message here is to simply raise awareness of quality and availability across both types of yeast. Here is a second example which covers British ale yeast in the same way, with the same disclaimer. I have actually heard of homebrewers not brewing a recipe that they have bought the grain and hops for because they could not obtain the yeast used in the recipe. It should be understood that there are always alternatives, and a quick internet search will certainly provide you with good information usually as to alternatives. But a really great way to go is to actually ask your homebrew store. Any good store will have experienced brewers who can easily make alternative selection suggestions for you. Here are 2 more examples to finish off this section, which cover 2 more of the classic popular types of yeast for homebrewers. Again, I must stress that these options are not all going to be the very same strain of yeast, but at the very least they are suitable for the style you are brewing, and I really recommend trying a wide selection of different types of yeast for each style anyway, so that you can in the end find out what the current go-to yeast selections are for yourself. Do keep in mind that the new yeast types are popping up all the time, so potentially new favourites are bound to be showing up over the years for you. Personally, I really enjoy this as there is always something new to try and discover, which keeps things fresh and interesting. Next, we have a topic that I'm going to call the Armchair Expert. If you are unsure of this term's definition, then here is a definition which ironically I found on the internet. This is a type of person that exists very much on the internet, and I would imagine this is very well known. But I have also met such people in the normal wide world, usually in bars or pubs, sometimes wearing a fake Rolex watch. I guess you know the type. I am sure that all of us have come across such people on social media, brewing forums, Facebook groups, and also on YouTube. Because of people like this, the level of bad advice that is available out there in this hobby is quite frankly staggering, and I believe homebrewers that are new should be made well aware of this. As I am sure we all know, it is very common to ask a question on a brewing group and you will receive a multitude of different answers. So who do you trust? It's not like often you know the credentials of any of the people that answer. In some cases your posting will receive enough answers that you are able to establish a common opinion, but that doesn't always mean that it's even correct. Quite often more research is the surefire answer here to ensure that you are on the right path. Yes, this takes longer, but at least you know you're on the right track. Sometimes the posting will be about a problem with a piece of brewing equipment, and again various answers will show up. Quite often I see some of the suggestions and know that this is nothing like what the manufacturer would recommend. As I'm sure many of you already know, I work in the homebrew industry and distribution, and part of my job is in serving the homebrew stores. All too often I see cases of permanently damaged equipment due to something the user has done in error. When asked why, a common reply is that this was based on something they were advised to do on an online forum or group. When you do something that goes against the manufacturer's guidance of use, it can be very tricky to have this covered under a warranty. So if you have a problem with equipment or are unsure as to how to handle it, then there are essentially two best routes to take. Firstly is to contact the store that you bought it from and ask for their advice. Chances are they will be able to advise you well, and if they are not sure, they can quickly contact the manufacturer for their help too. Secondly, you could cut out the middleman and simply go directly to the manufacturer. Yes, both of these solutions will probably mean a longer wait for the information, but at least it will be information that you can actually trust. Now, I also mentioned that you will find armchair experts on YouTube. I guess many of these are easy enough to spot, but there are also those that are career YouTube video makers who try all sorts of different topics with various different channels, hoping that something will stick and grow for some extra cash. Now naturally I'm not going to name these here, but I am adding on screen a selection of other YouTube channels that I do recommend, who certainly do know their stuff. I have put these in alphabetical order on this page. I will add links to their channels in this video's description, but you can easily find most of them simply by searching for the channel's name within YouTube. I have shown the names on this page exactly as they are registered on YouTube in terms of upper and lowercase text. Naturally I am limited to screen space here, so if your channel is not included, this does not mean I think you're an armchair expert. I also made the decision to exclude any channels that are not independent. These channels are all different in their own ways. Check them out and find out. Let us now look at buying homebrewing ingredients. Quite often I find myself asked to look at an ingredients list consisting of different malts, hops and yeast, and then I am either to suggest a recipe from my selection or to create a new one for the brewer. Now of course I do not mind helping people out with recipe ideas. It is after all one of the main focuses on my channel, but really the very best recipes are those that come from writing a recipe based on what is going to work best to create a certain style and taste profile, rather than looking at the ingredients that I have in stock and settling for something from those. Hops are the only ingredient that I will buy en masse, and I have a dedicated freezer for them, along with a vast selection of hop types that cover pretty much anything. Though even in this position I still regularly buy in new hops to suit a new recipe to avoid compromise. It is also worth saying that usually the first brew of a new recipe is very unlikely to be the final recipe, even for the more experienced of recipe writers, unless you are very lucky, or just happen to not be very fussy. Tweaks are usually made along this process to deliver the best end result. Naturally, beer recipe writing is somewhat different to cookery, where often you can give your recipe a taste and tweak it during its creation. So with all of this in mind, I strongly suggest that you choose your recipes first and then buy your ingredients. It is best to do this on the basis of buying what you actually need, rather than simply going out and buying a 25 kilo sack of pound malt along with hops and yeast that sounded good in the store. Yes, it will be a little cheaper buying in bulk, but unless you have an ideal place to store all of this from a temperature and humidity perspective, then it is all simply going to degrade faster than it really should. One key area of advantage you have as a homebrewer is the ability to brew with the freshest of ingredients, and this is something I suggest you take full advantage of. It also has to be said that having ingredients that you feel you need to use up will also lose you the freedom to brew exactly what comes into your head as the ideal next beer later on. I do hope that you found this video useful, informative and interesting. If so, why not consider liking and subscribing? For further support you can join the channel's Facebook group, and if you would like to support the channel then check out the channel's merchandise store, as all profits go back into the channel. Until next time, happy brewing!